I don't know if you've noticed, but there's some type of social media beef between Image Comics co-founders Erik Larsen and Jim Valentino over about who actually righted the ship at Image Comics way back in the late 90s and early 2000s. Erik Larsen went on to Cartoonist Kayfabe, I think 3 years ago, kind of disparaged the work that Jim Valentino did during his time as the publisher. And finally, Jim is actually talking about it. I guess he held the beef for a long time. And I do kind of feel bad for Jim Valentino. He didn't come out, during the original Image 6 or whatever. Like, he wasn't the most high-profile guy. Like, the stuff he had done was like Guardians of the Galaxy, whereas Erik Larsen had done Spider-Man, and Todd McFarlane had done Spider-Man. Jim Lee had done X-Men. Rob Liefeld had done X-Men and Cable and fucking Deadpool and all that kind of stuff. And he didn't quite have the name recognition of some of the other people. And over time, he's almost become like the forgotten guy of the original Image Comics founders. And that's probably an injustice to Jim Valentino, just personally, not on a professional level. But the two are beefing, and it all goes back to the beginnings of Image Comics as co-founders. In 1993, Image hired Larry Marder to act as executive director for the publisher, reporting directly to the partners Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, Erik Larsen, Jim Valentino, and Mark Silvestri. After Marder left in 1999 to help run McFarlane Toys, Jim Valentino was named the company's publisher. Another founder, Erik Larsen, took over as publisher in 2004, stating that he would shift to more superhero books from Valentino's emphasis on cutting-edge and alternative comic books. But you can understand why there might be some type of rivalry or beef between the two people. They did hold the same exact positions, and they both want to claim credit for fixing Image Comics, which, while it had an enormous amount of praise and an enormous amount of buzz about what all these creator-owned books were going to be when they came out, it kind of fell flat on its face for a lot of reasons, one of which they didn't really hire very many writers. They all decided that they could be the writers or their friends could be the writers, and they had a real hard time meeting deadlines. Now, me being in the military, every 2 to 3 years, I would have to move someplace and normally replace somebody. And even a lot of times during a single duty station, I would move positions and be in a new position of leadership, replacing somebody that had already been there before me. And of course, I always felt like I did a better job, but there was always like the professional courtesy where you don't really talk bad about the person you replaced or maybe some of the problems that you had to fix. You claim victory, but you don't really say it was their fault, just to be nice or whatever, especially when you were co-founders of the same company. But apparently Erik Larsen never got that memo as far as leadership. And a few years ago on Cartoonist Kayfabe, this is what he said that really rankled Jim Valentino. In this particular case, what had gone on is Jim Valentino was running the show, and Jim really had some strong connections in the indie crowd. So he had brought a lot of the indie guys, and he wasn't getting a lot of the more mainstream Marvel or DC Comics guys to come over because mostly he didn't have a real strong connection with a lot of those people. And at the same time, I kept hearing rumblings from people going around, I'd like to pitch a book at Image, but getting rejected by Jim Valentino would be too much of a blow to my ego. It's probably not something I should be saying on the podcast. There are a lot of things that were going on, at the end, or even during the time of Jim Valentino being there at Image Comics. Top Cow kind of left Image Comics at that time. Wildstorm was sold off to DC. So a lot of their more popular, stable titles were kind of removed from the publisher. So we did have a big mess to kind of clean up and actually make Image Comics successful at the time. And there was also a transition going on within comic books. Jim Valentino did some pretty good work. He's the guy that basically gave Brian Michael Bendis a really huge break. Obviously, Brian Michael Bendis ended up becoming a huge name at Marvel, so the hiring started going the other way. Marvel started hiring the people that Jim Valentino had kind of discovered, not the other way around, where it sounds like Erik Larsen was much more interested in bringing Marvel and DC guys over to Image. He continued on. I could see that was something where our comics were kind of becoming more weird and fringe, and also the audience wasn't necessarily receptive to all of it. And so there were a lot of comics that were starting out and just dying real quick. And then you'd have stories which would never get finished and they were just left hanging forever. And me, being the anal guy that I am, I was just like, oh my God, I'm a teenager. I must have these things resolved. I can't let everything be hanging there. It's driving me crazy. So I kind of just muscled my way in there. And it was a dick move on my part, but I just felt like this ship needed to be righted. We're going towards the rocks, and if we don't get going on a course which is putting out stronger books and having more hands-on art direction, we could be in real trouble. What's interesting is you see Larsen saying he doesn't really like the more fringe, weird stuff that Valentino was kind of incorporating into Image Comics. He wanted to go more in the line of superheroes, the stuff that he was familiar with and obviously the thing that had made the original Image 6 kind of famous and allowed them to create Image Comics in the first place. But if you look at Image Comics now, they don't really do superhero comic books. Yeah, you still have Spawn, and you do have like the Supermassive, Ultramassive, whatever that thing Kyle Higgins is doing. You do have that like little shared superhero pocket universe. But for the most part, it's all kind of weird and fringe stuff. Basically what Image Comics is today, and what Jim Valentino was certainly shepherding in, is they are what Vertigo was at DC Comics. Once independent comic book creators realized, I don't want DC Comics treating my creator-owned stuff like it's Batman, like they've owned it for 60 or 80 years or whatever. I would actually like credit for my own stuff. I would like to have some control over it. I would actually like to be able to profit off my own ideas, and maybe with the Netflix deal and all that kind of stuff. So really, while Erik Larsen is saying that he righted the ship, in the end, it appears, at least from my eyes, that Jim Valentino kind of won out in the end, that his vision was actually the correct vision, and really the vision that once Eric Stevenson, who's been the publisher at Image Comics, I believe since 2008, really decided to run with. Now, Jim Valentino apparently had been sitting on this, and he'd heard what Erik Larsen had said 3 years ago and was not very happy, but apparently he had some medical issues, didn't really have the time or means to actually go out there and speak about it, but decided to release, I guess, a statement on Facebook and other places, basically addressing the issue. Creators I brought into Image during my time as publisher include Kurt Busiek, Mark Waid, George Perez, John Romita Jr., Warren Ellis, Frank Cho, Jimmy Palmiotti, Amanda Connor, Ted McKeever, Kevin Smith, Tom DeFalco, Ross Ritchie, and Joseph Michael Linzer, among others. A few of the books I published during my time as publisher included The Walking Dead, Invincible, Ministry of Space, Powers, The Red Star, Fire Breather, Noble Causes, The Pro, the Guerrilla Comics imprint, Leave It to Chance oversized hardcover volumes, Liberty Meadows, Blunt Man and Chronic, and Jim Mahood's Stupid Comics. I had just brought in an old friend, Matt Wagner, with his seminal comic, Mage, and was on the verge of bringing over a major talent who would have brought in his entire catalog to us. And I'm not even going to mention the editorial help I gave to both The Walking Dead and Invincible. I don't consider any of these to be shitty comics. And you can see that he's got a bone to pick with Mr. Larsen. And once he starts laying out some of the people that did come into Image Comics during his time as publisher and some of the successes that he had with the titles, I can understand why Jim Valentino would take issue with what Erik Larsen had to say on Cartoonist Kayfabe, pretty much disparaging his time as the publisher at Image Comics, saying that he basically ruined everything and he had to be the one to come in and fix everything. And Jim Valentino should be proud of his legacy and the fact that he was able to bring in all those creators, and The Walking Dead, one of the last great indie titles that just sat there in the top 20 sellers for like years upon years. Nobody else was able to do that, really, other than Saga, which really isn't even doing that anymore. I mean, that was a huge win for them. Invincible, huge success. And I imagine Jim Valentino believes that he's one of the reasons that Robert Kirkman continues to be a mainstay at Image Comics with his Sky Brown imprint and everything going on with the Energon universe and all that. Would we even have that without Jim Valentino and his time as the publisher of Image Comics? Who knows? But I would say he had a big part in the success of Image Comics today. He continued. When I inherited Image in 1999, it was a wasteland of semi-professional books, swimsuit issues, and misogynistic titillation comics. The Image eye had lost its luster. Image books weren't selling. The brand was tainted by amateurs, and established talent was avoiding us like the plague. More than that, the company was unprofitable. I felt that Image deserved better, so I scorched the earth so that we could rebuild from the ground up. I righted the ship. I opened the book trade and library market. I found heretofore untapped revenue streams that allowed me to make the company profitable again. And by the time I left, the company had been in the black for 3 years straight, a first for Image Comics at the time. It wasn't easy. And I think you could almost read the frustration that Jim Valentino had really built up over the last 3 years, where Erik Larsen was out there saying, I righted the ship. And I guess the guys at Cartoonist Kayfabe would also talk about Erik Larsen riding the ship at Image Comics, based on their interview or whatever. And he's going, hey, when I got to Image Comics, everything was dead. We just lost Wildstorm. Top Cow was gone. We didn't really have any talent. It was an amateur hour over there at Image Comics. And I brought in John Romita Jr. I brought in Mark Waid. I brought in all these professionals. I discovered Brian Michael Bendis and Robert Kirkman, and I was able to actually make a profit in Image Comics, which really hadn't been done, especially not for 3 years, which he was able to accomplish by the time he left. So I definitely want to hear from you guys. Who do you think is right on this one? Is Erik Larsen right for stating that he had to right the ship after taking over from Jim Valentino because he went way too indie comic publisher on it? Or was Jim Valentino right that when he showed up, he actually got the company profitable again, discovered a ton of new names, and really revitalized the brand and kind of pushed it to what it is today? Because I would say when you hear what Valentino say and Larsen say for their, I guess, visions for what Image Comics could be, what Image Comics is today, which is not an alternative to Marvel or DC. These are not shared superhero universes. They really aren't even superhero comic books for the most part. They're just genre books that appeal to a bunch of different audiences that have made them very easily the number 3 publisher in North America when it comes to comic books, certainly in the direct market and all that stuff. It feels like in the end, Eric Stevenson and Image Comics agreed with Valentino's vision, and that's basically what they are today. And for a long time, Image Comics is basically what a Vertigo would have been if DC Comics didn't get in their own way and absolutely destroy that thing. So very interesting stuff. Always enjoy hearing about the history of comic books. Don't know that I absolutely love seeing, Image Comics co-founders beefing about who did what and all that kind of stuff, but it does bring up some interesting conversations and what these men's legacies should be, when it's all said and done, because my goodness, it's been over 30 years since the Image Comic 6 left, created an alternative, and the American comic book landscape really hasn't been the same since. If you would like more comic book conversations, pop culture type stuff, I do want to invite you to continue over to the Patreon. There's a link in the video description. Lots of great podcasts over there talking about comic books, reviewing comic books, Q&As, all that kind of stuff with your favorite guests like Doc, Jim, Aaron Sparrow. You haven't checked that out? I think there's a lot of stuff there that you will enjoy.